When my own children left me bleeding and alone in an airport after major heart surgery, I thought my life was over. Then my abusive ex-husband's secret will made them all beg for forgiveness. 2 in the morning. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. I'm sitting on a cold airport chair, clutching discharge papers in hands that won't stop shaking. My chest feels like someone's carved it open with a rusty knife. The surgical bandages under my thin coat are still damp with blood. And I'm alone. Completely, devastatingly alone. The shuttle driver had asked me 3 times if I was sure this was my stop. "You got family picking you up, ma'am?" he'd said, genuine concern creasing his face. I'd lied, said yes. Because how do you tell a stranger that your own children, the ones you carried in your body, fed with your own hands, loved with every broken piece of your heart, left you to die? A janitor mops past me, avoiding eye contact. Smart man. I probably look like what I am, a 68-year-old woman who just had major heart surgery, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to care. My phone sits silent in my lap. 3 missed calls to Maribel, 5 to Thorne, 7 desperate attempts to reach Celine, my baby girl, the one I thought still loved me. All unanswered. The intercom crackles. Flight 247 to Denver, now boarding. Families rush past, children clutching their mothers' hands, husbands carrying wives' bags. Normal people. People whose families didn't throw them away like yesterday's garbage. I close my eyes and remember Maribel's voice from this afternoon. "Mom, you're being dramatic. Hospitals have shuttles. You'll figure it out." Thorne had been worse. "Look, Clarice, I can't drop everything every time you have a medical episode. That's what hospitals are for." And Celine, God, Celine had whispered into the phone like she was confessing a sin. "Mama, I want to help, but Colton's family, they think you're manipulating me. I can't. I just can't." So here I am, dying mother, discarded like trash, with 3 crumpled dollars in my purse and nowhere to go. But here's what none of them knew. As they slept peacefully in their warm beds, convinced they'd finally rid themselves of their burden of a mother. Here's what would make them all come crawling back, tears streaming, begging forgiveness. My dead ex-husband, the same man who once screamed that I was worthless, who left me for a younger woman, who treated me like dirt for 20 years, had just signed papers that would change everything. If stories of mothers finding their strength after the ultimate betrayal speak to your soul, hit that subscribe button right now. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Because what happened next will make your blood boil. But that wasn't the worst part. You're probably wondering how a mother ends up abandoned by her own children. Trust me, 6 months ago, I was wondering the same thing. But let me tell you what happened after I made those calls from my hospital bed, because the pain in my chest was nothing compared to what came next. The nurses kept asking, sweetly, professionally, if anyone was coming to visit. "Family on the way, Mrs. Holloway?" they'd say, checking my IV, adjusting my pillows with the kind of practiced kindness that can't hide pity. I kept lying. "Soon," I'd whisper. "They're coming soon." But hour after hour, that chair beside my bed stayed empty. I stared at it until my eyes burned, remembering how I used to sit beside that same model of hospital chair when Maribel had appendicitis at 12. I'd held her hand for 6 hours straight, never leaving, never even thinking of leaving. When Thorne broke his arm playing football in high school, I slept in a chair just like that one for 3 nights running, making sure he wasn't in pain, wasn't scared. His teammates' mothers went home. I stayed. And Celine, sweet Celine, when she had pneumonia at 8, I practically lived in the pediatric ward, reading her stories, sneaking in her favorite cookies, being her whole world until she was well. Now, I'm 68 years old, fighting for my life, and none of them can spare a single evening. The worst part wasn't the pain medication making me dizzy, or the wires connected to my chest, or even the fear that I might not survive the surgery they were planning. The worst part was the silence where their voices should have been. My phone sat on the bedside table like a monument to abandonment. No return calls, no worried texts, nothing. Mrs. Chen, a woman who barely knew me beyond polite waves over the garden fence, visited twice. She brought soup in a thermos, told me about her grandson's graduation, held my hand when the anxiety got bad. A stranger cared more than my own children. That's when the memory hit me, sharp as the chest pains that brought me here. My ex-husband, Elias, 23 years ago, screaming in our kitchen while our kids cowered upstairs. "You're worthless, Clarice, a burden. Nobody stays with someone as pathetic as you unless they're trapped." I'd left him for those words, for the way he made our beautiful children afraid in their own home. I'd taken my babies and my dignity and built a life where love wasn't conditional, where kindness wasn't rationed. Or so I thought, because lying in that hospital bed, abandoned by the very children I'd protected from his cruelty, I started wondering if Elias had been right all along. Maybe I was worthless. Maybe I was just a burden people endured until they found an excuse to walk away. The second day, when the cardiac surgeon explained that my heart was barely functioning, that I'd need immediate surgery or face certain death, I called them again. Maribel's assistant answered, "She's in back-to-back showings today. Can this wait until tomorrow?" Tomorrow. Well, I might not survive the night. Thorne's phone went straight to voicemail, that smooth, professional voice. "You've reached Thorne Halloway, Senior Investment Consultant. Your financial future is important to me, so please leave a detailed message." Your financial future is important to me. But his dying mother apparently wasn't. Celine at least picked up, but her voice was rushed, distracted. "Mama, I'm at Colton's work party. Can I call you back?" "I need surgery. Tonight. I'm scared." "Surgery?" A pause, then the sound of her covering the phone, muffled voices, her husband's family, probably, the ones who thought I was too needy, too dramatic, too much trouble for their precious son's wife. "I'm sure you'll be fine," she said finally. "You're tougher than you think." Tough. What a convenient word for justifying abandonment. That night, as they prepped me for surgery, signing consent forms with trembling hands, counting backward from 10 while strangers in masks hovered over me, my last thought before the anesthesia took hold was this: if I died on that table, my children would probably read about it in an obituary. But I didn't die. I woke up stitched and bandaged, alive, but changed. The surgery had saved my heart, but something else inside me had broken beyond repair. The something that had always believed, truly believed, that blood meant love, that family meant safety, that the children I had given everything for would never leave me behind. I should have seen the signs that my children were becoming exactly like their father. 2 weeks after I came home from the hospital, alone, shaky, stitches still pulling at my chest, Maribel finally showed up at my door. Not with flowers, not with an apology, with a briefcase. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the living room like she owned the place. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floors I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees for 30 years, each strike echoing like a judgment. She looked around my small cottage with those sharp real estate eyes, calculating, assessing, finding it wanting. The same home where she'd taken her first steps, where I'd nursed her through chickenpox, where I'd stayed up all night helping her with college applications because her future mattered more than my sleep. "You can't keep living like this," she announced, settling into my favorite armchair without invitation. "It's irresponsible." I was still weak, still catching my breath from the walk to answer the door. The surgery had saved my life, but recovery was harder than I'd expected. Simple tasks left me exhausted. Living like what? Alone, managing all these finances, this house. She gestured dismissively at the walls that held 40 years of memories. "You're not thinking clearly, Mom. The medication, the stress, it's affecting your judgment." That word, judgment, landed like a slap. This from the daughter who hadn't returned my calls when I was dying. She opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency, pulling out a stack of papers crisp enough to cut skin. "I've been talking to Thorne and Celine. We're worried about you." Worried. Now they were worried. Not when I was lying unconscious in my garden, not when I was facing surgery alone, not when I was abandoned at a hospital curb. Now when I was home and vulnerable. "What are these?" I asked, though some instinct already knew. Some maternal warning system was screaming, "Danger." But I was too tired, too grateful for any attention from my children to listen. Power of attorney documents, simplified financial management, transfer of property deed. Her voice was smooth, professional. She could have been selling a house to strangers. Easier. That word tasted like poison. I stared at the papers, my reading glasses fogging with the tears I was too proud to let fall. Why would I need this? Maribel's expression softened into something that might have been sympathy if you didn't know better. "Because you're sick, Mom. Because you're alone. Because when you forget to pay bills, when you can't manage the house anymore, everything will fall apart. We're trying to help you." Help. Another poisoned word. "I've managed for 23 years, since your father left. I kept this house, raised you 3, worked 2 jobs, never missed a mortgage payment. Never." Her smile was thin as paper. "Yes, but that was before. You're different now, weaker. We can take care of everything so you don't have to worry." Don't worry. Just sign your life away and don't worry. I tried to read the documents, but the words blurred together. Legal language designed to confuse, to hide intentions behind courtesy. All I could make out were the important parts. My name signing away control, their names taking it. "I need time to think," I said finally. Maribel's mask slipped just slightly. Impatience flickered across her features like lightning. "There's nothing to think about, Mom. It's just paperwork. Don't you trust us?" Trust. The cruelest word of all, coming from someone who hung up on me when I was dying. But I was tired, so tired, and she was here, wasn't she? Finally here, finally paying attention to me. Maybe this was what caring looked like from adult children. Maybe I was being ungrateful, suspicious, paranoid like old people get. "Let me sleep on it," I managed. She stood, her smile returning, bright, fake, cold as winter sunlight. "Of course, but don't wait too long. The longer these things drag out, the more complicated they become." After she left, I sat in my empty house holding those papers like they were snakes. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The legal language swirled in my head, mixing with the medication fog and the exhaustion that came with healing. That night, Thorn called. My son, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them Mama's flowers. His voice was warm, concerned, everything I'd been starving for. Clarice, Maribel told me she stopped by. How are you feeling? The kindness in his tone almost made me cry. Tired, confused about these papers she left. Don't overthink it, he said gently. We're just trying to help. Imagine the relief. No more worrying about bills, about the house, about making financial mistakes. I handle investments for a living. I can make your money work better, get you more comfortable returns. He painted such a pretty picture. Me relaxed and cared for, while my competent son managed everything with professional expertise. No more balancing checkbooks with arthritic fingers, no more lying awake worrying about property taxes. And the house? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. It's too much space for one person, he said, his voice still gentle but firm. All these stairs, this big yard, the maintenance. We could sell it, invest the proceeds, set you up somewhere smaller, more manageable. Think how much easier life would be. Easier, smaller, manageable. All words that meant the same thing. Less. Less space, less independence, less of me. But his voice was so kind, so patient. The son I remembered was still in there somewhere, wasn't he? 2 days later, Celine came. My baby girl, the one who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who I'd rock to sleep singing lullabies until she was too old to admit she still needed them. She sat beside me on the couch, took my hands in hers, hands that were soft, manicured, unmarked by the years of work mine bore. Mama, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I'm sorry I couldn't come to the hospital. I wanted to, but I know, sweetheart. The lie came evilly because I needed to believe it, needed to believe my youngest still loved me. She squeezed my hands, her eyes bright with unshed tears. We all just want what's best for you. Maribel and Thorn, they're good with business things. They can take care of all the boring paperwork so you can focus on getting better. Getting better. As if signing away my independence was medicine. I asked, searching her face for any sign of the little girl who used to tell me everything, who trusted me completely. She said, I think you've carried so much for so long. You deserve to rest, to let someone else handle the heavy lifting. Rest. It sounded so peaceful, so final. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped all three of them with homework, where we'd eaten countless meals together, where I'd signed their permission slips and college applications and wedding invitations. The paper spread before me like a trap. My pen felt heavier than stone. With each signature, I could feel pieces of myself being carved away. Control of my bank accounts, gone. Decision-making power over my investments, gone. Ownership of my home, gone. But my children were talking to me again. They were visiting, calling, including me in their plans. Maybe this was the price of love. Maybe this was what family looked like when you got old. I signed everything. The ink was barely dry when things started changing. Subtle at first. My monthly allowance came later than expected. Thorne explained it was banking delays. When I asked for extra money to fix the leaky faucet, Maribel said she'd look into it but never followed up. My utilities got shut off once because someone forgot to process the payment. I sat in my cold, dark house for 6 hours before a neighbor noticed and helped me call the company.
When I mentioned it to Thorne, he laughed it off. Mistakes happen, Clarice. Good thing you don't have to worry about these details anymore. Good thing. Such a good thing that I was slowly losing control of my own life, one mistake after another. But I told myself it was fine. They were learning, adjusting. These were growing pains in our new arrangement. They loved me. They were taking care of me. I should have known better. I should have remembered that love doesn't come with a price tag, doesn't require you to sign your life away. But that was only the beginning.
3 months into my new, simplified life, I was starting to feel like a ghost haunting my own existence. The grocery money came sporadically. When I asked Maribel for funds to stock my pantry, she'd sigh and say, "Mom, you're eating too much processed food anyway. I'll have Whole Foods deliver something healthier." But the deliveries were small, expensive, full of foods I didn't recognize. Quinoa and kale when I needed bread and butter. Organic this and free-range that when I just wanted a can of soup I could actually open with my arthritic hands. My medication copays were accidentally late twice, leaving me to stretch pills by taking them every other day. When I called Thorne, his assistant said he was reviewing my healthcare expenses for unnecessary treatments. Unnecessary treatments, like the heart medication keeping me alive, was optional. But I told myself they were adjusting, learning how to manage someone else's life. I'd raised them to be independent, after all. They weren't used to taking care of anyone but themselves. Then came the day that changed everything. I'd been napping on the living room couch. The exhaustion still came in waves, dragging me under without warning. The sound of voices in my kitchen woke me. Familiar voices, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. My children were in my house. They must have used the spare key I'd given them for emergencies. But they hadn't come to check on me. They hadn't even noticed I was home. "She's more stubborn than we expected," Maribel's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "But she'll cave eventually. They always do." I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every instinct told me to announce myself, to walk in and ask what they were discussing. But something darker, some terrible intuition kept me frozen. "The house appraisal came back at $480, Thorne said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Once we get her moved out, we can list it for $520 easy. Split 3 ways, that's over $170,000 each." My house. They were talking about selling my house like it was already theirs. "Do you think she suspects anything?" This was Celine's voice, softer but no less calculating. "Of course not," Maribel laughed, and the sound was sharp as breaking glass. "She still thinks we're the loving children who just want to help poor confused Mom. It's actually pathetic how grateful she is for any attention." Pathetic. My own daughter called my gratitude pathetic? "I still feel a little bad," Celine murmured, but her voice carried more worry than guilt. "She raised us, sacrificed everything. Doesn't that count for something?" "Sacrifice?" Thorne's voice turned cold. "She chose to have kids. That was her decision, not ours. We don't owe them our entire lives because she did the bare minimum of keeping us alive." The bare minimum? 20 years of working 2 jobs, going without so they could have what they needed, staying up all night when they were sick, cheering at every game and recital and graduation, all reduced to bare minimum? "Besides," Maribel added, "she's old. She doesn't need all this space, all this money. What's she gonna do? Live forever? We have families to support, futures to build. She's had her time." She's had her time? Like I was a library book past its due date?
The nursing home we looked at is actually pretty nice. Cable TV, bingo nights, group activities. She might even make friends. Nursing home? They were planning to put me in a nursing home and sell my house out under me. Friends, snorted Thorne. Right. Look, Celine, I know you're feeling guilty, but think practically. She's going to need care soon anyway. Why wait until she's completely helpless? This way, we can manage her assets properly, make sure everything is handled efficiently. Efficiently? Like I was a business problem to be solved. And honestly, Maribel's voice dropped conspiratorially. After the way Dad talked about her all those years, can you blame us for not being sentimental? She drove him away with her neediness, her constant demands for attention. Maybe if she'd been a better wife, our childhood wouldn't have been so chaotic.
My blood turned to ice. They were rewriting history, painting their father as the victim and me as the villain. Elias, who'd screamed at them until they cried, who'd made them flinch when he raised his voice, who'd called their mother worthless. Somehow he was the wronged party. She's just old, Thorne continued. And old people get confused, make bad decisions. We're actually protecting her from herself. Protecting me by stealing from me. The power of attorney makes everything legal, Maribel said with satisfaction. She signed it willingly. If anyone asks, we're just managing her affairs because she can't handle them anymore. Do you really think she can't tell what's happening? Celine asked. And for a moment, I heard an echo of the little girl who used to climb into my lap. She's on so much medication, half the time she doesn't know what day it is, Thorne replied dismissively. And even if she figures it out, what's she going to do? She signed the papers. She gave us control. Legally, we're in the clear. Legally. Not morally. Not lovingly. Not right. Just legally. The sooner we get her settled somewhere with proper supervision, the better, Maribel concluded. I found a nice facility about an hour away, far enough that she can't just show up whenever she feels lonely. An hour away? So their visits would be even rarer, more convenient to skip. I heard chairs scraping, papers shuffling, the sound of my children cleaning up their conspiracy, like it was just another business meeting. Should we check on her before we leave? Celine asked, and my heart fluttered with desperate hope. She's probably sleeping, Maribel said dismissively. Best to let her rest. The less we disturb her routine, the easier the transition will be. Transition. Such a clinical word for destroying someone's life. Their voices faded as they moved toward the front door, and I heard the familiar sounds of my children leaving me. Car doors slamming, engines starting, tires on gravel, the same sounds that had followed every visit, every holiday, every time they'd briefly remember they had a mother. I lay on that couch for hours after they left, staring at the ceiling I'd painted myself 15 years ago when money was tight but pride was strong. The same ceiling I'd looked at during countless sleepless nights worrying about their futures, their happiness, their dreams. Everything made sense now. The delayed payments, the forgotten bills, the carefully rationed grocery deliveries. They weren't learning to manage my life. They were systematically dismantling it. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a resource, a problem to be managed efficiently until I could be disposed of conveniently. The realization should have broken me, should have sent me spiraling into the same despair I'd felt in that hospital bed. But instead, something else stirred in my chest. Something harder than heartbreak, sharper than grief. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns bright and fades fast. The cold, steady kind that burns forever. The kind that plans and waits and remembers every slight, every betrayal, every moment of casual cruelty. They thought I was pathetic, confused, too medicated to understand what was happening to me. They were about to learn how wrong they were. But first, I needed to survive what was coming, because if I knew my children, and after 40+ years of loving them, I did, they wouldn't wait long to put their plan in motion. The nursing home, the house sale, the final disposal of their inconvenient mother. I had to be ready. And then everything exploded. The second heart attack hit me like a freight train 3 days after I overheard their kitchen conspiracy. I was standing at my bathroom mirror, trying to convince myself that the pale, hollow-eyed woman staring back wasn't really me. The stress of knowing, truly knowing, what my children thought of me had carved new lines around my eyes, stolen what little color the first surgery had left in my cheeks. Then the pain struck. Not the sharp, sudden agony of the first collapse, but something worse. A crushing weight that spread across my chest like concrete hardening in my lungs. I made it to the phone just as my legs gave out, collapsing beside the kitchen table where I signed away my life 3 months earlier. My fingers shook so badly I could barely dial 911. "Please," I gasped to the operator. "My heart, I can't breathe." The paramedics found me on the kitchen floor, conscious but barely. As they worked over me, IV lines, oxygen mask, urgent medical jargon I didn't understand, I kept thinking about that overheard conversation. She's had her time. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the universe's way of agreeing with my children. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez looked grave as he explained the results. The same young doctor who treated me before, who still showed more genuine concern than my own flesh and blood. "Mrs. Holloway, your heart is significantly weaker than it was 6 months ago. The stress, the medication changes, the irregular care, it's all taking a toll. We need to operate immediately, but I have to be honest. This surgery is much riskier than the last one." Riskier. The word hung in the sterile air like a death sentence. "Without it?" I whispered through the oxygen mask. His eyes were kind but truthful. "Days, maybe weeks. With it, there's a good chance. But recovery will be long. Months. You'll need constant care, supervision, help with everything." Everything. The word my children used when they talked about managing me. "I need to calm my family," I said, though the words tasted like ash. He nodded gently. "Of course. They'll want to be here for such a serious procedure. They'll want to be here. If only he knew." But I called anyway. Some desperate, dying part of me still believed that facing death might awaken whatever love they had left for their mother. Maribel first, because she was the eldest, because some ancient part of me still remembered when she was 5 years old and promised to take care of me when I got old. "Mom?" Her voice was sharp, impatient. "I'm with a client. This isn't a good time." "I'm back in the hospital. They say I might not make it through this surgery." Silence. Not the shocked, horrified silence of someone processing devastating news, the calculating silence of someone weighing options. "Which hospital?" she asked, finally. Hope fluttered in my chest. "St. Mary's, room 314. The surgery is scheduled for—" "Mom, I can't drop everything every time you have a medical episode. I have 2 kids, a husband, a career. You can't keep disrupting everyone's lives because you're scared." Medical episode. Like my heart failing was a temper tantrum. "I might die," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "The doctor said that last time too, and you were fine. Hospitals dramatize everything to cover their liability. Look, I'll try to stop by this weekend if I can, okay?" This weekend. The surgery was scheduled for 6 hours from now. She hung up before I could beg. My hands were shaking as I dialed Thorne. My son, my only son, who I once believed would be my protector when I got old. He answered on the first ring, his voice professional and distant. "Yeah?" "Thorne, it's Mom. I'm in the hospital again. My heart. The doctor says if I don't have surgery tonight, I won't survive the week." A pause. Then, "Okay, what do you want me to do about it?" The coldness in his voice was like ice water in my veins. I want you to come. I'm scared. I might not make it through this time." "Look, Clarice." He'd long since stopped calling me Mom, but hearing my first name from his lips felt like a slap. "I can't keep rearranging my life every time you decide you need attention. I have meetings, obligations, a life that doesn't revolve around your medical drama." Medical drama. My dying was inconvenient theater. "This isn't drama," I said, my voice breaking. "This is your mother, asking you to be here when she might take her last breath. If it's really that serious, the doctors will handle it. That's what they get paid for. Don't be so dramatic." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, tears blurring my vision. 2 children down, 1 left. Celine, my baby girl, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who still sent me pictures of sunsets sometimes, who had to have some love left for her mother. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice soft and rushed. "Mama, what's wrong? You sound upset." The concern in her voice almost broke me. "Sweetheart, I'm in the hospital. My heart is failing. They need to operate tonight, and the doctor says—" "He says I might not make it." "Oh, Mama!" Her voice cracked, and for a moment I heard my little girl again. "I'm so sorry. This must be terrifying." Relief flooded through me. Finally, one of my children understood. "Can you come?" I whispered. "I don't want to be alone. I'm so scared." Silence. Then the muffled sound of her hand over the phone, urgent whispers I couldn't quite make out. "Mama," she said finally, and I could hear the apology already forming. "I want to. You know I do. But Colton's parents are here from Seattle, and we have dinner reservations at that place they've been wanting to try for months. They flew all the way here, and if I cancel—" Dinner reservations. While her mother faced death alone? "Please," I begged, past pride, dignity. "I held you when you were scared. I stayed up all night when you had pneumonia. I never left you alone when you needed me. Please don't leave me alone now. I know, Mama, and I feel terrible, but Colton says his parents will never understand. They think you're too needy already, and if I drop their visit for another medical emergency, they'll convince him I'm choosing you over our marriage. Another medical emergency. Like this was just one in a long series of inconveniences. I might die tonight, I whispered. You said that last time and you were fine, she replied, her voice growing distant. You're stronger than you think. The doctors will take care of everything. I'll visit as soon as I can, I promise. Empty promises from empty hearts. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the beeping monitors and the terrible truth. My children had chosen dinner reservations and business meetings and their convenience over their dying mother. An hour later, as they prepped me for surgery, a nurse asked gently, "Is your family on their way?" I almost laughed. No, they're not coming. Her face creased with sympathy. I'm sure they want to be here. Sometimes people just don't know how to handle medical situations. If only she knew they were handling it perfectly by not handling it at all. As the anesthesia mask came down over my face, as the world faded to black, my last thought was crystal clear. If I survived this surgery, I would never be the same woman who had raised those children. That woman, the one who sacrificed everything, who forgave everything, who believed family meant something, was dying on this table. What came back would be someone entirely different. Something inside me broke cleanly, like a chain snapping free. I survived that surgery, though part of me didn't want to. For 3 days, I lay in that hospital bed staring at the empty chair where my children should have been. Nurses rotated in and out with professional kindness, checking my incisions, monitoring my vitals, asking carefully neutral questions about my support system. Support system. What a joke. On the 4th day, Mrs. Chen visited again. Sweet woman, bringing homemade soup and sitting in that empty chair like it was the most natural thing in the world. Your children must be so relieved you're okay, she said, spooning broth into my mouth like I was a baby bird. I didn't have the heart to tell her. They didn't even know I was alive. When they finally discharged me, against my protests, because where was I supposed to go, I took a taxi home to my empty house. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, but expectant, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. I was sorting through the mail that had piled up, bills I couldn't pay without permission, catalogs for things I wasn't allowed to buy, when I found the envelope. Thick, cream-colored paper. Expensive. The return address read, Morrison and Klein and Associates, attorneys at law. My first thought was that it had something to do with the power of attorney, maybe some legal complication from my children's management of my affairs. I almost threw it away without opening it. What was the point? I had no control over anything anymore. But something made me tear it open anyway. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the same instinct that had kept me alive through 2 heart attacks and complete abandonment. The letter was formal, cold, typed on letterhead that screamed money and authority. Dear Mrs. Halloway, we regret to inform you of the death of your former husband, Elias Richard Halloway, who passed away on March 15th from complications related to pancreatic cancer. Elias was dead. I read that line 3 times before it sunk in. The man who called me worthless, who had left me for a woman 20 years younger, who had made our children flinch with his anger. gone. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, no satisfaction. Just a hollow emptiness where some emotion should have been. As per the instructions in Mr. Halloway's last will and testament, you are required to attend the reading of said will on April 3rd at 2 p.m. Your presence is mandatory, as you are named as a beneficiary. Beneficiary. Me. The woman he'd once screamed at in front of our children, calling me a pathetic burden who would never amount to anything without a man to prop her up. I almost didn't go. What could Elias possibly have left me? A final insult from beyond the grave? Some token amount designed to humiliate me one last time in front of his perfect second family? But I went anyway. Maybe because I had nothing else to do, nowhere else to be. Maybe because I was curious what kind of cruelty a dead man could inflict. The law office was everything I expected. Mahogany panels, leather chairs, the smell of old money and older secrets. I walked in wearing my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for Celine's wedding, mended carefully where a button had pulled loose. Inside the conference room, I wasn't alone.
Greta Halloway sat at the far end of the massive table, draped in black silk that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her two sons flanked her like bodyguards, grown men in expensive suits who looked like their father but had their mother's cold, calculating eyes. They all turned when I entered, and the disdain was immediate and obvious. Greta's lip curled like I'd brought a bad smell into the room. Her sons whispered to each other behind their hands, probably wondering why the pathetic first wife had been invited to witness their inheritance. "Mrs. Halloway," the attorney said, gesturing to a chair across from Greta's family, "please, have a seat. We'll begin momentarily." I sat alone on my side of the table, feeling like a defendant facing a jury. These people had everything: money, status, Elias's love, his final years. What could I possibly be doing here? The attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and silver hair, cleared his throat and began reading in that special monotone lawyers use for formal documents. Most of it was legal jargon I didn't understand, whereas and heretofore and other words designed to make simple things sound complicated. But then he got to the important part. To my beloved wife Greta and her sons Michael and David, I leave my personal effects, my art collection, and a sum of $200,000 each to be distributed immediately upon my death. Greta straightened in her chair, satisfaction radiating from her like heat. $600,000! A fortune to someone like me, though probably pocket change to them. I waited for my name, expecting to hear about some small token, maybe $1,000, maybe nothing at all, just enough to make me feel grateful for scraps. Instead, the attorney continued, "The remainder of my estate, including all properties, investments, business holdings, and liquid assets, currently valued at approximately $42 million, shall be transferred in full to my first wife, Clarice Marie Halloway." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. $42 million. The number crashed over me like a tidal wave. I, who had been counting pennies for groceries, who couldn't pay my own utility bills without permission, who had $3 crumpled dollars in my purse when my children left me at that airport, was suddenly worth $42 million. Greta shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled backward. "This is outrageous! This is impossible! Elias despised her. He told me 1,000 times she was worthless, pathetic, beneath contempt." The attorney adjusted his glasses calmly. "The will was amended 6 months ago, Mrs. Halloway. Mr. Halloway was of sound mind and clear intent. His instructions were very specific. "But she's nobody," one of Greta's sons sputtered. "She's a nothing, a welfare case. She doesn't deserve—" "What I deserve," I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since entering that room, "is apparently $42 million. The transformation was immediate and stunning. Greta's face went white, then red, then purple. Her sons looked like someone had slapped them with a frozen fish. The widow who had everything was suddenly left with almost nothing, while the discarded first wife had inherited a fortune. "We'll contest this," Greta hissed, her composure cracking like ice in spring. "We'll prove he wasn't mentally competent. We'll prove she manipulated him somehow." But even as she said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. How could I have manipulated a man I hadn't spoken to in 20 years? A man who had publicly humiliated me, who had made sure everyone knew how much he despised his pathetic first wife? The attorney handed me a folder thick with documents. "Mrs. Halloway, these are the account numbers, property deeds, and investment portfolios now under your control. I'll need to schedule a meeting to go over everything in detail." I walked out of that office in a daze, clutching papers worth more money than I could comprehend. Behind me, I could hear Greta screaming at her sons, their voices rising in panic and fury. Outside, the spring air felt different against my skin, lighter. The same sun that had shone on my poverty now shone on my wealth, and the change was more dramatic than I could have imagined. Then my phone rang. "Mama?" Maribel's voice, but changed, softer, trembling. I heard about Elias. Are you okay? This must be such a shock." I hadn't spoken to her since she refused to visit me in the hospital. Now suddenly she was concerned about my emotional well-being. "I'm fine," I said carefully. "Listen, I know I should have been there more, but I want you to know I'm here for you now, whatever you need. Can I come over? We should talk about everything." Everything. Like the $42 million that had somehow leaked to the family gossip network in less than 3 hours. "I'll think about it," I said and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Thorne this time. "Clarice, Jesus, I just heard. Are you handling this okay? This kind of sudden wealth can be overwhelming for someone your age." Someone my age. The same man who told me my heart surgery was medical drama was now worried about my ability to handle good news. "I'm managing," I said dryly. "Look, I know I've been distant lately, but that's going to change. Family needs to stick together during big transitions like this. Why don't I come over tonight? We can order Chinese food, talk about investment strategies, make sure you're protected from people who might try to take advantage." People like you, I thought, but didn't say. The third call came an hour after I got home. Celine, my baby girl, sobbing into the phone. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been there when you were sick. I should have chosen you over Colton's parents. I was weak, and I failed you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." The tears sounded real. The regret sounded genuine. For a moment, my heart softened toward the little girl who used to bring me dandelions. "I want to make it up to you," she continued through her sobs. "I want to be the daughter you deserve. Can I come over? Can we talk? I miss you so much, Mama." "I miss you so much,"
Words I'd been dying to hear for months, arriving exactly when I had something they wanted. "I'll call you back," I said, and hung up. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd overheard their conspiracy, where they planned to sell my house and put me in a nursing home, and I laughed. Not a happy laugh, not a bitter laugh, just the sound of someone recognizing a cosmic joke so perfect it bordered on the absurd. For months, they had treated me like a burden, a problem to be managed, a dying woman whose time had passed. They had stolen my independence, planned my disposal, left me to die alone. Now, overnight, I had become valuable again. Not because I was their mother, not because I had loved and sacrificed for them, but because I had money. 42 million reasons to suddenly remember they cared. The irony was delicious. Elias, the man who called me worthless, had posthumously made me worth more than any of them could dream. The husband who destroyed my self-worth had given me the power to rebuild it on my own terms. Over the next week, they circled like vultures. Daily visits, phone calls, flowers, apologies that sounded rehearsed but felt desperate. Maribel brought casseroles she clearly bought from expensive restaurants. Thorne showed up with legal documents to protect my interests. Celine wept at my kitchen table, begging forgiveness for sins she never acknowledged before. But I remembered the hospital bed. I remembered the empty chair. I remembered the airport where they left me to die. Most of all, I remembered their voices in this very kitchen. She's had her time. Money had revealed their true nature once. When they thought I was broke and helpless, they'd shown me exactly what I meant to them. Now, money was revealing their true nature again, desperate, grasping, willing to say anything to get their hands on a fortune they felt entitled to inherit. But I wasn't the same broken woman they'd abandoned. That woman had died on an operating table while her children chose dinner reservations over her potential last breath. What had survived was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely less forgiving. They thought $42 million had changed the game in their favor. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I thought I'd hit rock bottom in that airport. I was wrong. My children were about to show me depths of cruelty I never imagined. The legal challenge came exactly 3 weeks after the will reading. I was sitting in my garden, the same spot where I'd collapsed 9 months earlier, when the process server arrived. Official papers, thick as a novel, accusing me of being mentally incompetent to manage my own inheritance. The plaintiffs? Greta Holloway and her sons, claiming Elias had been manipulated into changing his will. And right there, co-signed on the legal documents that would strip me of everything, were 3 familiar names: Maribel Holloway Chen, Thorne Holloway, Celine Holloway Martinez. My own children were trying to have me declared insane. The betrayal should have crushed me. 6 months ago, it would have sent me spiraling into that familiar darkness of self-doubt and maternal guilt. But the woman who had been abandoned in an airport no longer lived in this body. I called the lawyer Elias's estate had provided, a sharp woman named Patricia Morrison, who looked like she could slice through steel with her smile. "They're claiming diminished capacity due to your recent surgeries and medications," she explained, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. They want the court to appoint a guardian to manage your assets until you're deemed fit. A guardian, I repeated, understanding immediately. One of them, I assume. Thorne, specifically, he's presented himself as the most financially qualified family member. Of course, my son wanted legal control over $42 million, and my other children were helping him get it. What do we need to prove? I asked. Patricia's smile could have cut diamonds. That they are perfectly capable of managing your own affairs, that their claims are motivated by greed, not concern, and that you remember everything they think you've forgotten. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th. For 6 weeks, I prepared like I was studying for the most important exam of my life. Bank records, medical files, documentation of every conversation, every abandonment, every cruel dismissal of my needs. But mostly, I prepared myself. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and saw a different woman than the one who had signed those power of attorney papers in desperation. My hair was styled, silver, yes, but strong silver, like polished steel. My navy dress was pressed and dignified. My spine was straight. I looked like someone who deserved $42 million. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had somehow leaked. Elderly widow battles family over massive inheritance, and reporters lined the back rows like hungry vultures. On one side sat Greta and her sons, their lawyer a slick man in an expensive suit who probably charged more per hour than I used to make in a month. On the other side sat my children. Maribel wore black, her face carefully arranged in an expression of concerned daughter. Thorne looked professional and trustworthy in his banker's uniform of navy suit and red tie. Celine was crying softly into a tissue, the picture of a heartbroken child forced to take action against her beloved but failing mother. They were good. I had to give them that. Anyone watching would see devoted children reluctantly seeking help for their deteriorating parent. Anyone who didn't know what I knew. The judge, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and no-nonsense eyes, called the court to order. This is a hearing to determine the mental competency of Mrs. Clarice Holloway to manage her financial affairs. Greta's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a confused old woman, barely recovered from major surgery, taking dangerous medications that affected her judgment. He called character witnesses, neighbors who'd seen me looking frail, store clerks who'd witnessed me forgetting things. Then came my children. Thorne took the stand first, his voice heavy with reluctant duty. Your Honor, I love my mother dearly, but over the past year, I've watched her mental state deteriorate significantly. The medications, the surgeries, the isolation, it's affected her ability to make rational decisions. He was so convincing, so sincere. If I didn't know better, I might have believed him myself. Can you give specific examples? The lawyer prompted. She's become paranoid, Thorne said sadly. She thinks we're trying to steal from her, when we're only trying to help. She forgets conversations we've had, makes the same requests multiple times. Last month, she called me 17 times in one day, confused why her utility bill hadn't been paid. 17 times, because he'd forgotten to process the payment and I was sitting in a dark, cold house. She's also become financially reckless, he continued. She's talked about giving large sums to random charities, to neighbors she barely knows. Without proper oversight, she could lose everything within a year. Lies, all lies. but spoken with such concern, such apparent love. Maribel was next, her testimony even more damning. My mother has always been emotionally volatile, but since her surgeries, it's gotten worse. She makes unreasonable demands, expects us to drop everything whenever she has a medical concern, which is constantly. She's become manipulative, using guilt and emotional blackmail to control our behavior. Manipulative. The woman who'd begged them to visit her in the hospital was manipulative. Just last week, Maribel continued, she threatened to cut us out of her will entirely if we didn't visit more often. That's not the rational behavior of someone capable of managing a fortune. Finally, Celine took the stand, tears streaming down her face. I love my mama more than anything, she whispered, but she's not the woman who raised me. She's confused, frightened, angry all the time. She lashes out at us for trying to help. I'm terrified that someone will take advantage of her condition, convince her to give away money she needs for her care. Someone like you, I thought, watching my youngest daughter perform grief like a professional mourner. We don't want her money, Celine concluded, her voice breaking. We want our mother back, the strong, independent woman she used to be. But she needs protection now, whether she admits it or not. The performance was flawless. 3 heartbroken children forced to take painful action to protect their beloved but failing mother. If I were watching from the gallery, I'd probably sympathize with them too. But I wasn't watching. I was living it. When it was my turn to take the stand, Patricia Morrison stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, Mrs. Halloway would like to speak on her own behalf. I walked to the witness stand on steady legs, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, the truth my children never expected me to remember, much less repeat. Mrs. Halloway, Patricia began gently, how do you respond to the claims that you're not mentally competent to manage your inheritance? I looked directly at the judge, ignoring the cameras, the reporters, the gallery full of strangers. But most of all, I ignored my children. Your Honor, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, my children claim I'm confused, paranoid, unable to manage my affairs, but let me tell you what I remember with perfect clarity. I paused, gathering the strength I'd been building for 9 months. Your Honor, my children claim I'm confused, paranoid, unable to manage my affairs, but let me tell you what I remember with perfect clarity. It was not just fear, but stress, the uncertainty of having swords, the stress of having to deal with them when they came and not knowing how the storm would treat you. I remember my second heart attack when doctors told me I might not survive the night. I called each of my children, begging them to come say goodbye. Maribel said she had a client meeting. Thorne said he had dinner plans. Celine said she couldn't cancel on her in-laws. The courtroom was dead silent now. I remember being wheeled into surgery, possibly for the last time, with no family present. Do you know what I thought about as they put me under anesthesia? I thought about how my children would probably read about my death in an obituary. Judge Harrison leaned forward, her expression intent. But most clearly, Your Honor, I remember the conversation I overheard in my kitchen 3 months ago when my children thought I was sleeping. I remember my eldest daughter saying I was pathetic for being grateful for their attention. I remember my son calling my decades of sacrifice the bare minimum, and saying I'd had my time. I remember my youngest agreeing that I didn't need my house or my independence because we do. Celine had stopped crying. All three of my children looked like deer caught in headlights. They claim I'm paranoid, that I imagine they want to steal from me, but they've already done it once. While I was recovering from surgery, they convinced me to sign power of attorney documents, supposedly to help me. Then, they used those documents to control my money, delay my bills, restrict my access to my own funds. They were planning to sell my house and put me in a nursing home an hour away so I'd be too inconvenient to visit. If your heart is racing right now, hit that like button. Sometimes life has a way of flipping the script when we least expect it. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone come crawling back when your situation changed? I looked directly at my children for the first time since taking the stand. They don't love me, Your Honor. They never did. I was a burden when I was poor and sick. Now I'm a prize because I'm rich. But I'm the same woman either way. The woman who gave them everything, who sacrificed everything, who loved them unconditionally, even when they showed me nothing but contempt. My voice didn't waver, didn't break. It was steady as stone. They claim they're protecting me from people who might take advantage of my condition, but they are the people taking advantage. They are the ones who saw a sick, vulnerable woman and decided to steal her independence, her dignity, her home. The silence in that courtroom was profound. I am not confused, Your Honor. I am not paranoid. I am not mentally incompetent. I am a woman who finally sees her children clearly without the filter of maternal love that blinded me for 68 years. And what I see are strangers who share my blood, but not my values, who learned nothing from the love I gave them except how to exploit it. I turned back to the judge. The inheritance is mine, legally and morally. Elias may have been a terrible husband, but in death, he gave me something precious, the power to choose my own life for the first time. I will not let the children who abandoned me steal that choice, no matter how convincing their tears or how sincere their supposed concern. I stood to leave the witness stand, then turned back one final time. And if they're so worried about someone taking advantage of me, they should look in a mirror, because the only people who have ever truly hurt me, who have ever stolen from me, who have ever left me alone when I needed them the most, are sitting at that table right now. The gavel came down like thunder. This court finds Mrs. Clarice Holloway to be of sound mind and fully competent to manage her own affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied. The explosion of sound that followed, reporters shouting questions, Greta screaming objections, my children's stunned silence washed over me like a wave. But I was already walking away, my head high, my spine straight, my dignity intact. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over the people who claimed to love me, and it felt like freedom. 6 months after that courtroom victory, I'm sitting in the garden of my new home, a beautiful cottage by the lake, an hour away from the city where my children lived their lives without me. The morning sun catches the water like scattered diamonds, and I sip coffee from a mug that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. But the real luxury isn't the expensive cup or the lakefront view. It's the silence of my phone. No desperate calls from Maribel. No manipulation disguised as concern from Thorne. No tearful apologies from Celine that mean nothing because they change nothing. Just blessed, peaceful, quiet. The attempts to reconcile lasted exactly 3 weeks after the hearing. Maribel tried first, showing up at my old house with the legal document of her own, papers to return the power of attorney she'd stolen, as if giving back what was mine was somehow generous. "Mom, I know you're angry," she'd said, standing on my doorstep like a salesperson I didn't want to buy from. "But we can fix this. Family is family. Family is family." The last refuge of people who've exhausted every other excuse for their behavior. "No," I'd said simply, and closed the door. Thorne's approach was more professional. He sent a formal letter through his business office outlining an investment proposal that would benefit us both. He wanted to manage my portfolio, take a small percentage for his services, help me maximize my returns. I had Patricia Morrison send back a single sentence. "Mrs. Halloway declines your generous offer." Celine was the hardest to ignore. She came with her children, my grandchildren, beautiful little souls I barely knew because visits had always been rationed, conditional, used as rewards for good behavior or weapons when I disappointed. "Mama," she'd whispered, tears streaming, her youngest clinging to her leg. "Please don't punish them for my mistakes. They love their grandma." But I looked at those sweet faces and saw the future. Children who would grow up learning that love comes with conditions, that family means obligation, that caring for elderly relatives is a burden to be shared and resented. "I'm not punishing anyone," I told her gently. "I'm just choosing peace." The hardest part wasn't cutting them off. The hardest part was discovering I didn't miss them. Oh, I missed the children they used to be. I missed 5-year-old Maribel bringing me dandelions, 8-year-old Thorne climbing into my lap during thunderstorms, teenage Celine painting my nails while we watched movies. But those children were gone, replaced by adults I didn't recognize, didn't like, and certainly didn't trust. The people they'd become, I didn't miss them at all. Instead, I found myself surrounded by a different kind of family. Mrs. Chen visits twice a week now, bringing soup and gossip from the old neighborhood. Patricia Morrison has become more than my lawyer. She's become my friend, someone who understands that strength sometimes looks like walking away. I've traveled places I never dreamed of seeing. Last month, I spent 2 weeks in Tuscany, eating pasta and drinking wine and marveling at art created by people who died centuries before my problems were born. Next month, I'm going to Alaska to see the Northern Lights. But the greatest journey has been internal. I volunteer now at a women's shelter, helping women who are where I was, trapped by the idea that love means accepting abuse, that family means sacrificing everything, that walking away means failure. "But they're my children," one woman said to me last week, tears streaming as she talked about sons who stole her disability checks and daughters who called her crazy for complaining. "Yes," I told her gently, "but you're somebody's child too. You're God's child, the universe's child, your own inner child who deserves protection. And sometimes protecting that child means protecting her from the people who should love her most." The hardest truth I've learned is this: Not all mothers get to have loving children. Despite everything we sacrifice, everything we give, everything we endure, some of our children grow up to be people we wouldn't choose as friends, much less trust with our hearts. That doesn't make us failures. It makes us human. I get letters sometimes from women who've heard my story. They tell me about their own ungrateful children, their own moments of abandonment, their own struggles with the guilt that comes from admitting that the people we're supposed to love most have hurt us the deepest. One letter particularly moved me, from a woman in Ohio whose daughter had stolen her life savings. Reading about your court case gave me the courage to press charges against my own daughter. For years, I told myself that blood was thicker than water, that family meant forgiveness. But you showed me that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable cruelty. My daughter is in jail now, and I should feel guilty, but instead, I feel free. Free. What a beautiful word. I am free now in ways I never imagined possible. Free from the obligation to set myself on fire to keep others warm. Free from the guilt that comes with having boundaries. Free from the exhausting work of loving people who see that love as weakness to exploit. Some people think I'm bitter, cutting off my children over money. They don't understand that it was never about the money. The money was just the lens that brought their true feelings into focus. When I was poor and sick and vulnerable, they showed me exactly who they were. When I became rich, they showed me again. In both cases, I was just a resource to be managed, either disposed of or exploited, but never truly loved. The Elias of 20 years ago would be laughing at the cosmic joke. The man who called me worthless gave me the fortune that proved my worth. Not to him, not to my children, but to myself. I am worth loving. I am worth protecting. I am worth choosing. And if the people who share my blood can't see that, well, that says everything about them and nothing about me. I still live with heart disease. I still take medications that sometimes make me dizzy. I still move a little slower than I used to, still get tired more easily than I like. But I wake up each morning in a house filled with peace instead of anxiety, surrounded by people who chose to love me instead of people who felt obligated to tolerate me. My garden is thriving, my bank account is healthy, my conscience is clear. Most importantly, the woman looking back at me in the mirror is someone I recognize again, not the ghost I'd become during those months of abandonment and abuse, but the woman I was always meant to be, strong, independent, worthy of love, but not desperate for it. Not a burden, not pathetic, not disposable, just Clarice. And finally, after 68 years, that's enough. So tell me, if you found yourself in my situation, what would you do? Would you forgive family that abandoned you, or would you choose your own peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they're worth more than the crumbs others throw them. Hit that subscribe button for more stories of women who found their strength when the world tried to steal it. Until next time, remember, you are never too old to choose yourself. The sun is setting over the lake now, painting the sky in shades of hope. Tomorrow, I'll wake up free again. And that, my friends, is the most beautiful inheritance of all.